Your brain already made this decision, not you, your brain, before you clicked play, before you even knew this video existed. Something inside your skull had already chosen. And the terrifying part, science can prove it. This isn't philosophy. This isn't a thought experiment. In 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet put electrodes on people's heads and asked them to do one simple thing: move their wrist whenever they felt like it. That's it. Whenever you want. You're in control. Except they weren't. Libet found something that broke every assumption about what it means to be human. The brain began preparing for the movement a full 550 milliseconds before the person consciously decided to move. Half a second. The decision was made in the brain before the conscious mind ever knew about it. The you that felt like it was choosing, it was just a passenger getting a notification after the fact. Think about what that means. Every decision you believe you're making right now, every thought that feels like yours, every choice that feels deliberate and free, your brain may have already made it, and you are simply watching it happen, calling it your own. But here's where it gets stranger. Because Libet's experiment wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something much darker. In 2008, researchers at the Max Planck Institute used fMRI brain scanning to take this further. They didn't just detect the signal half a second before the decision. They could predict which hand a person would move up to 10 seconds before that person had any conscious awareness of choosing. 10 seconds. Before you think you've decided, your brain has already committed. The study was published. It was replicated. And then something interesting happened. Most people never heard about it, because if they had, they would have asked the same question you're asking right now. If my brain decides before I do, then who am I? Let's slow down. Because there are two ways to interpret this, and one of them is deeply uncomfortable. The first interpretation is mechanical. The brain is just faster than consciousness. Your neural circuits process information, calculate outcomes, run simulations of possible futures, and then hand the result up to your conscious awareness. By the time you decide, the work is already done. You are the CEO who walks in, reads the report prepared by 10,000 employees, and announces the decision. You didn't do the work, you just approved it. That's unsettling enough. But the second interpretation is worse. What if consciousness isn't making decisions at all? What if consciousness is just a story, a narrative your brain tells you afterward to make you feel like you're in charge? What if free will isn't a mechanism but a memory, a constructed memory of a choice you never actually made? Neuroscientists call this confabulation. The brain is extraordinarily good at inventing reasons for things that already happened. You've experienced this. You make a decision, and then immediately your mind begins generating justifications. I did it because, I chose this because, but those reasons came after. They didn't cause the action. They explained it retroactively, like a press secretary inventing a story for a decision already made in a closed room. Your brain is running a press office, and you think you're the president. Now, here's where quantum mechanics enters the conversation. Because some scientists looked at Libet's results and thought, maybe this proves determinism. Maybe the universe is a machine and your brain is just another gear. Every thought predetermined. Every word you speak, the inevitable result of atoms colliding since the Big Bang. But others pushed back. They pointed to quantum indeterminacy. At the subatomic level, events are genuinely random, not practically unpredictable like a coin flip, but fundamentally, irreducibly uncertain. An electron doesn't have a definite position until you measure it. A radioactive atom doesn't have a hidden timer. The moment of decay is truly random in a way that no amount of information could predict. And the brain, some argued, might be exploiting this. Neurons fire across synaptic gaps, ion channels open and close. These processes occur at scales where quantum effects become relevant. If quantum randomness influences neural firing, then your decisions aren't predetermined. They're not just the output of a deterministic machine. They're random, which means you're not a robot. You're a dice roll. And suddenly, free will doesn't feel rescued. It feels replaced by something equally terrifying. Think about it. If your choices are random, you didn't make them either, Randomness isn't freedom. Randomness is chaos. Randomness means you don't control your decisions any more than you control a roulette wheel. The number isn't predetermined, but you didn't choose it. Nobody did. So we have a problem with no clean exit. Determinism, your brain is a machine. Every decision locked in from the start. You never had a choice. Randomness, your brain is a chaos engine. Every decision a quantum accident. You still never had a choice. Free will requires something that is neither predetermined nor random. Something that is genuinely yours, genuinely controlled. And neither physics nor neuroscience has found that thing. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But here is what makes the Libet experiments more complex than they first appear. Because there's a detail that most people skip over. A detail that changes everything. Libet himself didn't conclude that free will was an illusion. He found something else. Yes, the brain initiates the movement before conscious awareness. But the conscious mind has a window, a narrow one. About 200 milliseconds before the movement begins, a person can veto it. They can stop it. The decision is made unconsciously, but the execution can be consciously blocked. Libet called this free won't. You might not be the author of your decisions, but you might be the editor. You can't choose what your brain generates, but you might be able to reject it before it becomes action. The unconscious mind proposes. The conscious mind disposes. This is a strange kind of freedom. Not the freedom to create, but the freedom to refuse. Think about that in your own life. The impulse to say something cruel, the urge to avoid a difficult conversation, the instinct to take the easier path. Those impulses aren't chosen. They arise, but something in you can intercept them, can say no, can override. Maybe that interception is what free will actually is. Not origination, veto power, but even this is contested because the veto itself is a brain process. The you that exercises the veto was also generated by neural activity that preceded conscious awareness. Even the refusal was prepared before you knew you were refusing. The editor is also being edited by something deeper, something you cannot see. It goes all the way down. And this is where it stops being neuroscience and becomes something older, something that philosophers have struggled with for thousands of years. What is the self? Is there a you that exists apart from your brain? Something that observes, chooses, refuses? Or is the self just another story the brain tells itself? A character the neural network invented to make sense of its own activity? Some of the most serious philosophers of mind now argue for what's called illusionism, the view that consciousness as we experience it, the feeling of being a unified self making free choices, is a functional illusion, not a lie exactly, more like a useful model. The brain builds a model of itself as an agent, and that model is real and functional. But it's not what it appears to be. You are a model the brain built to navigate the world. Efficient, practical, convincing, but a model nonetheless. This is not a comfortable idea, and it's not one that's settled. There are serious philosophers and neuroscientists who reject illusionism entirely, who argue that consciousness is irreducibly real, that the experience of making a choice is itself evidence that something genuine is happening, that the hard problem of consciousness, why there is something it is like to be you, cannot be dissolved by pointing to neural correlates. The debate is alive, it's fierce, and nobody has won. What we do know is this: the simple story most of us carry through life, the story that says, I decided, I chose, I am the author of my actions. That story is more complicated than we thought. The brain is doing things before you know about them. Decisions are being shaped by processes you cannot access and cannot control. The self that feels sovereign is working with incomplete information about its own operations. This doesn't mean you should stop making decisions. It doesn't mean responsibility disappears. It doesn't mean nothing matters. But it does mean the most fundamental question you can ask about yourself. The question, who is making my choices, does not have the simple answer you assumed it did. And here is the final layer. the one that connects all of this to something much larger. We are living in an era of algorithms, of systems that predict your behavior before you exhibit it. Netflix knows what you'll watch next. Spotify knows what song you want before you search for it. Your phone knows where you're going before you open maps. These systems are not magic. They are pattern recognition. They are reading the outputs of your brain and inferring its next move. They are, in a sense, more aware of your future decisions than you are, which means the question of whether your brain decides before you do is no longer purely philosophical. It is practical, it is commercial, it is political. Because if decisions can be predicted, they can be nudged, influenced, shaped. If your brain commits to something before your conscious mind knows, then the window between unconscious initiation and conscious veto can be manipulated, closed, bypassed. The science of the unconscious decision is now the science of persuasion, of advertising, of political messaging, of every interface designed to capture your attention before your prefrontal cortex has time to evaluate it. You are not just a passenger in your own mind. You are a passenger in a vehicle that other people are learning to steer. Libet ran his experiment in 1983 with simple wrist movements. The technology to extend that experiment into complex real-world decisions is accelerating. Brain-computer interfaces are not science fiction. They are in clinical trials. They are being funded by the most powerful companies on the planet. The question of when your brain decides versus when you decide is not just a curiosity. It is the question at the center of the next century, and most people have no idea it was ever asked. I've spent 50 years working with the physics of information, with the foundations of quantum mechanics and the nature of reality. And when I look at this question, what I see is this. The universe may or may not be deterministic at the fundamental level. We don't fully know. But the brain, your brain, is operating on rules that predate your awareness of them, generating choices before you have the experience of choosing, building a self that feels real and sovereign, but may be the most sophisticated illusion in the known universe. Whether that means free will is dead, or simply that free will is something stranger and smaller than we imagine, is a question that remains genuinely open. But one thing is certain. The next time you feel absolutely sure that you made a decision freely and deliberately and of your own choosing, pause for just a moment. Your brain started this process before you knew it was happening. And somewhere in the silence before thought, something decided for you. There is one more layer, the most personal one. Consider memory. You don't just make decisions in real time, you also remember making them. You have a story of your life in which you made choices that led to consequences. You took that job, you left that relationship, you said yes when you could have said no, you stayed when you could have left. And in your memory, each of those moments feels like a genuine act of authorship. You chose, you decided, you did it. But memory is not a recording. Memory is a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, your brain is rebuilding it from fragments, filling in gaps, smoothing over inconsistencies, editing the narrative to be more coherent than it actually was. Psychologists have shown this repeatedly. Memories change every time you access them, details shift, emotions get recolored, causality gets rewritten, which means the story you tell about your choices may be doubly constructed. First, your brain made the decision before you knew about it. Then your memory rewrote the story of how and why it happened. By the time the event is part of your personal history, it has been processed, edited, and filed in a way that preserves the feeling of agency, while potentially discarding the actual mechanics. You are not remembering your choices. You are remembering your brain's preferred narrative about them. And that narrative was designed to keep you functional. The illusion of authorship isn't a bug, it's a feature. Without it, motivation would dissolve. The feeling of being the author of your life may be exactly what makes it possible to live one. The brain is not just deceiving you, it is protecting you with a very elegant lie. And here is where it connects back to physics. A deterministic universe is one where the present state fully specifies all future states. The brain obeys physical laws. Every neuron, every synapse, every electrochemical signal is matter following rules. If those rules are deterministic, your next decision is already implicit in your current brain state. And if quantum randomness is real, then the future isn't predetermined. But it isn't controlled either. It's waiting to be generated by processes nobody can predict. Either way, the comfortable middle ground where you live as a free agent making deliberate choices is very hard to locate. Maybe it doesn't exist, or maybe the question is wrong. Free will is a concept from lived experience. Physics describes matter and energy. Demanding that one framework invalidate the other may be the mistake. You experience choice. That experience is real. The fact that neuroscience can map decisions doesn't erase the experience of making them, but it changes what that experience means. Every hour of every day, you make decisions, and you feel in each moment like you are the one making them. Ask where that feeling comes from, because the question of who is actually deciding is not a question with a comfortable answer. It is the question at the